Hello, it is Tuesday. Good morning. It's Tuesday. It's the 3rd of October, and I'm reading out of Eyes of Horus. It is a far memory book by Joan Marshall Grants. She remembered her previous incarnations, and she wrote 7 books about her previous lives. This is playing 3,500 years BC, and she is Ra here, a male, and an heir to the nomarch of the ORYX. This is in Egypt. He grows up in a corrupt Egypt, which worships Set, the Lord of Fear. So when he's an adult, he joins a group to defeat this. And I stopped at chapter... No, I'm just looking where I finished. I should have looked beforehand. We are in the 5th part of this book, in chapter 8, Women of the ORYX. And I finished it after my battery got empty. He is sitting with his wife, Mary. I try to look stern and impressive, which is never easy if you have no clothes on and are sitting on a stool beside your wife's toilet chest, while she pretends that 3/4 of her attention is occupied with mixing oil and malachite to the exact shade she needs for eye paint. I never expect Kias to infect you with her moon madness. Do you imagine that I would deliberately take you into danger where, even if you escaped being wounded or killed, you might be taken prisoner or condemned to death or banishment? I should be careful not to be wounded so that I could look after you. If you were taken prisoner, of course, I should make sure that I was captured too. If you were put to death or banished, you couldn't be so cruel as to wish me to stay behind. Dear Ra, you couldn't want that to happen to me. If I were to die, would you want to go on living? If I were sent to live among the barbarians, would you want to go on being lonely in the ORYX? I saw that she was so distressed by my apparent lack of consideration that I said hastily, "No, Mary, of course I shouldn't. You know that if you died, every day would seem an interminable exile until I joined you." She sighed contentedly. "Then we are agreed, and there's nothing more to argue about." "Oh, but there is." She came and sat on my knees and put her hand over my mouth. "You may kiss my fingers, but you mustn't talk any more until you decided not to be so silly. I have been miserable ever since I knew there might be a battle, because you might go far away from me. Now the battle has become only another adventure we can share together. It's very bad for people to be unhappy, especially when they're having a baby. Do you want your son to be born looking like a melancholy little monkey just because his mother was sad?" I have a suspicion I've read this. "He will probably be lucky even if he manages to look as human as a monkey if his mother goes rushing or getting involved in battles. He will be too small to notice what I'm doing for several months yet, and I don't expect the gods would be so unkind as to let Pharaoh die just when I shouldn't be able to help the Watchers. I could come with you almost immediately after he's born. I have arranged for 2 foster mothers in case one can't give him enough milk. I hoped fervently that if fighting did take place, my son would prove more persuasive than his father in keeping Mary at home, but I saw it was no use arguing with her any more at present. What if I agreed to your scheme?" I said. "Kias and I, with the 12 priests and the 30 soldiers, women who have been trained how to look after the wounded, will follow the army. With us will come other women who are young and strong and used to field work. They will carry spare arrows and javelins and things, and thus release fighting men to carry arms. Women can also look after the pack donkeys and do the cooking. I have already got the names of 212 who want to join us. It was their being able to free men for arms that made Sebek approve of our idea. You have won Sebek over too, have you?" Oh yes, Sebek was quite easy. You mustn't be offended that Kias told Hanub and Sebek first. She had the right to do it, because it was her idea, and I thought it would be more of a surprise for you if I didn't tell you until I had arranged the details. It was a surprise, I said fervently. It was the first idea I've had I didn't share with you at once, and that was more your fault than mine. You remember we were talking about leading the ORYX? The day when Noom the Potter must have been listening to our conversation. I nodded, and she went on, well, that day you seemed so very set on leading the ORYX off to war while I stayed behind for years crying among our children. Children? Remember what you promised. Ramois to say if ever Horus became importunate. It's not fair to try to make me laugh. This is very serious. For hundreds of years, men and women of all other castes have been able to work together. But soldiers have not been able to share their lives with their women. That's why many soldiers aren't very near to their wives. You can't love someone who's living a separate existence that you don't want to share. And if they do want to share it and are not allowed to, they can't be really happy. If someone's life is cut off from love, it must turn into another direction. They have to prove their strength by fighting, preferably against a foreigner. Nearly every animal will defend itself when attacked, but very few, if any, kill for pleasure. The tradition which separates a soldier from his woman is gradually making him feel he has so little to lose that he looks for escape, either into the role of a hero or into death. The man who loves his wife will fight twice as fiercely in defense of his home. But you cannot invade a foreign country with soldiers who are happy. Think what it would mean, Raab, if we could change the warrior's tradition. Side by side, man and woman would fight together in defense of their security, just as a lion and lioness would protect their cubs. But no man would wish to take his woman into an unnecessary war if he knew she would have to suffer as he did. If the soldiers of Punt and southern Nubia, the men of the desert, and the Asiatics came to share in this new tradition, it might lead to the end of all invaders, and no longer would mankind shed their brother's blood. I was surprised to find that Hanuk agreed with Kia's scheme, and had not been persuaded to approve it against his better judgment. He was a little anxious that I might be offended, because I had not been told of it sooner, and as soon as I told him that Mary had informed me of their plans, he said, I told Kia she ought to have told you about it at the beginning, but she made me promise to keep her secret until she and Mary were ready. I expect at first you thought it quite impractical, as I did, until the Kias made me realize that my first reaction was born of prejudice. Now I consider it as necessary as any other of the Watcher's changes. Surely to protect his woman from danger is a man's most fundamental law. What kind of danger? Pestilence, hunger, pain, extremes of heat or cold, anxiety? Of what use is it to defend her with armed strength when the greatest security can only come through she and her husband living as though they were one? I know as well as you do that only a woman who has reached a certain stage of development is ready for such an affinity. But the nearer they can reach to that ideal, the greater the happiness they can attain. More than 3/4 of the higher ranks of the Watchers have attained the marriage of Ptah. They have come from all castes. But the one thing they have in common is that the pattern of their lives is one in which both husband and wife can share. When circumstances threatened to divide them from each other, they came to Hotep Ra, because it gave them sanctuary against separation. Two people who love each other have a dual strength, which can give them security even in the stress of danger, but they cannot achieve security if they are living in constant threat of separation. You talk as though soldiers were the only people who have to leave their wives. What about traders, or they whose work is to transport produce from one part of Egypt to another? Why should women not travel as freely as men? They can, until they have children. After that, they have to stay and look after them. We had been down to the soldiers' village to see some of Sebek's new mace-bearers at their exercises, and on the way home we had stopped to drink at a well. Finding it pleasant in the shade, we sat down with our backs against a palm tree to continue our conversation. My last remark seemed to have amused Hanuk for some reason. "Have you told Mary that?" he said. "I don't see her being content to stay at home and look after your children while you wander around Egypt." "She's different. She will come with me, of course. She always does. And the baby will be looked after by a foster mother, and when he's older, he will have a nurse." "You think your company is more important to Mary than that of her child?" "I know it is, as hers is to me, just as my mother was more important to father than Kias or I ever were." "You agree, then, that if Mary was forced to be separated from you, because there was no one else to look after the children, she would consider it a flaw in the perfection of your marriage, and also that it is quite probable she would resent the curtailment of her freedom caused by her child?" I nodded, and he went on, "The Watchers recognize 3 degrees of marriage, and it is vital that provision should be made for each of them in every caste. First, there is the marriage of the long years, the oath of the new name, only undertaken by those who, like you and Mary, know that their affinity has come from the past and will endure beyond the span of many lives. The degree second to that is the marriage for life, entered into only after 2 years of marriage of the 3rd degree, during which both are free to leave each other without the priestly decree which is required if people wish to part after having entered the marriage for life. Many women who are not yet capable of a more permanent relationship are content to live the greater part of their lives as though they were unmarried, even though they share a house with a man and have borne children to him. The tie which holds such women to their home and children is almost certainly stronger than the link of affection with her husband. When he goes away, they would prefer to stay behind, and within the fabric of the present laws they are already well provided for. But those whose links to the husband are stronger than any other should be free to follow him if the work he has chosen takes him at times away from home. There are people, both men and women, whose special talent is for the care of young children. Such people may be childless, or have a small family, or a fisherman who catches more fish than he needs himself uses his skills for the benefit of the community. Why then should others not look after more children than are born of their flesh, using their special talent for the common good? Would women ever consent to having their children cared for by people who did not belong to their families? You had better ask Mary that. She has told me she had already prepared for 2 foster mothers for your child, and you should know that is not a sign of unwilling maternity. Mary tells me that you and Kias went to the house of the captain to talk to the soldiers' women. We did, and never has an idea had a more enthusiastic welcome. It was so easy to see which of the soldiers had a woman who really loved him, and which came from a home that had been set up for some reason of expediency. Sometimes it was a wife who wanted to come with us, sometimes it was a sister, or the concubine of a man who was still unmarried. 212 asked to be allowed to join us, and to share all dangers with their men. It was a greater number than I had expected from less than 1,000 men. Kias is having a large house built next to the 2 houses where the orphans are brought up, and the children of the women who come with us are going there. Hanu, wouldn't the women stay at home and do certain kinds of work which are of direct benefit to the army? They could tan leather for shields or feather arrows, or weave linen for bandages. Wouldn't that be much more satisfactory than having women with the army? I suggested that to Kias, but she told me it would be quite useless. A woman finds little consolation in working for an abstract idea, perhaps because she is usually more of a realist than a man. If you told her she was weaving linen for bandages, it wouldn't make her feel any nearer her husband than if she were weaving it for one of Mary's dresses, or the sail of a pleasure boat. If she loves a man, she wants to be with him, needs to be with him. She can carry his food and spare weapons on the road to battle, just as in peace she carries water from the well. And what if she's wounded? She will find that pain easier to bear than childbirth. One is apt to forget, Ra, that though men are oversensitive about exposing their women to the wound of an arrow, there are many who consider the travail of birth as a thing of little consequence, over which women make a disproportionate fuss. I wish I felt that, I said feelingly. Mary seems to take it for granted that our child is a son, and that his birth will only cause her the most temporary inconvenience. I think that when she was talking yesterday about coming with me when we march against Menhead, she pictured herself as coming up to me just after I had declared the victory of the Watchers to inform me that she had thought the thick of the battle a fitting place for our son to be born. And then, while the assembly acclaimed us, she would present me with our son strong and squealing on a shield, his mother, of course, remaining quite unruffled by her recent ordeal. I expect Kia's would be like that too. I'm always afraid of Mary guessing the horrors I sometimes picture. I suppose it's because the most vivid memory I have of my mother is of her dying after Kios was born. Mary says I was a woman only 2 or 3 lives ago. She says I had a child. It wasn't hers, although she was a man then. I wish I could remember having a child, then I might realize it isn't as bad as I think it is. It might seem even worse, said Hanu gloomily. I had forgotten your mother died because Kias was born. I knew it was soon afterwards, but I thought it was from some other cause. You're in love with Kias, aren't you, Hanuk? Yes, I always have been. I hope she marries you. So do I. I would rather be her husband than wear the white crown. This is the end of this chapter. I think I might have read something twice there, but I'm not sure.